scientists, and they can't get through all that stuff. So, but they do know that it is not ethical to mass medicate people with an uncontrolled substance that has not been consented to by the vast majority of people that they're treating. It is not ethical and moral to do so. So that's what you people have to work on, that ethical and moral side of things. Jim mentioned the Harvard School, the School of Public Health in Harvard, and last summer they came out with a meta-analysis, a large analysis of the studies on IQ in kids. And Jim mentioned 26 of the 27 studies powerfully showed that it decreases IQ in kids. When that study came out, we presented that to the Red Deer City Council. The powers that be on the other side, the medical officer of health from Edmonton, came up and said, well, that's not true. There's actually, there's just 0.4 difference. So at the break, I pointed out to him that actually this was not true, that it was a 7-point drop in IQ, which is extremely significant. And I pointed out to him, and Jim as well, how in the papers this is actually proven on print, and he actually had to agree that he was wrong. He said 0.4 is actually 7 points. 0.4 to 7, that's a large difference. And so I asked him if he would correct that error that he presented to City Council and to a room full of people. And he said he'd consider that. And so after the break, I kept waiting for him to make that change, make that correction, that he'd been wrong. He never said a single word about that for the rest of the presentation. So the people of Red Deer and Red Deer City Council still think that there's only a 0.4 of 1 IQ point drop, and that's just not the case in those 27 studies. It's 7 IQ points. So that is the way that medical officers of health, dental officers of health, those of you who saw Dr. Roman Cooney, who's the head of dentistry for Health Canada, when he presented here 2 years ago, the things that he was saying were just totally ludicrous. Yet we didn't have a chance to refute that. He said you could drink 15 liters of fluoridated water every day for 10 years and not have a single side effect. Does anybody believe that in this room? I certainly hope not. I mean, that even Alberta Health Services, the conservative Alberta Health Services, say that that's not true. So, unfortunately, we really can't trust the people in power that believe us these days. But please, don't be too hard on the dentists and doctors and other medical professionals that still support fluoridation, because in a lot of cases, it's simply being misinformed. Perhaps like I was before 1998, just being too busy to look at the literature and trusting the powers that be that are feeding us that information. So, inform people.
Doesn't the CHR have access to the same research? Like, what advantage do they have to go from fluoride?
The question is not the CRHA and the other professional organizations. There's over 90 organizations that endorse fluoride right now. Do they not have access to that information? Yes, they do. But they prefer not to read it because they think, in their blinded state, and blinded, that they are right. And they're just so convinced that they're right, that they're helping the poor by using fluoridation for the poor people, and that they have research that backs what they say. They don't have the research, it doesn't help the poor, so they really don't have a lot of leg to stand on.
They may have a fluoride brain.
They might drink too much fluoride. So, yeah, please, just educate them. Have some compassion for them. Don't be too hard on them. But let them know that they're wrong. And let them know that you have the information or access to the information through professionals. Buy them that book. That's one of the best things you can do right there.
You just made a point earlier about proving it wrong that it was 0.4 to 7. Can I ask you why you didn't stop that with our people and correct people?
Because we're not allowed to. That's part of the process. The process is often quite manipulated and controlled, and it's manipulated and controlled in favor of the people that want to make their points and want to win that particular case. And the powers that be set up the information sessions, and they set up the format, and it's often biased towards not getting all the information out or not being able to refute information that's wrong.
Well, can I just make an additional, when we presented to City Council, that's, it's hard to imagine just standing here, because, now I can talk, right? But in City Council, you can't talk unless it's your turn.
Yeah.
And when they're in that position, they've already had their turn, and nobody can talk, unless somebody asks them a question, and nobody asks them a question.
So often that they'll make Dr. Beck go first, and then they'll come along and refute or try to refute or negate some of his points, and then Dr. Beck has another chance to refute their points. Whereas in Calgary, it worked the other way around. Dr. Beck was the last one to speak, so he was able to refute a lot of the misinformation was put out by the so-called experts. So it's a lot of it's the process that's set up. So I do have some good news for you. I believe a dentist from here in Lethbridge was elected recently as the head of the Alberta Dental Association. Dr. Fong. Fong?
I think he's the president.
Yeah. So I don't know what his stand is. I think Mark was inferring that it's not that good for our side. But a dentist from Calgary was also elected to that board unanimously, Dr. Craig Young. I think you're going to hear a lot about Dr. Craig Young because he's a highly ethical dentist. He does a lot of research, does a lot of alternative practices, and he, like many dentists in Calgary, will not let fluoride across their doorstep of their office in any way, shape, or form. Will not let fluoride across their office. And he stood up at that ADA meeting, at the annual general meeting, and said, "We have had enough. We've had enough of suppression. We have had enough of this control. We've had enough of this hard-handed tactics that the Alberta Dental Association has used for so many years in suppressing dentists and making them speak or toe the party line. Any dentist in Alberta can speak out at any given time if they're pro-fluoride. They can say anything they want. Any dentist in Alberta cannot even say a single word anti-fluoride publicly without getting admonished and without getting slapped down by the Dental Association to the point that they've been threatened to lose their livelihood, lose their license." And Dr. Young stood up there. I'm sorry?
Same for Mercury.
Yeah.
And my dentist is under exam
For Mercury. Yeah, so Mercury's some other things. Mercury developments, yeah. So, you know, if you're making a good livelihood and feeding your children, and someone comes along and says they're going to take your license and your livelihood away, what are you going to do? It takes a lot of courage to stand up for you, but you know what's right. But Dr. Young stood up at that meeting and said, enough. We've had enough. We're going to take a stand here. And then after he was elected, the association came to him and said, well, you know, you're a little too radical. We're not going to let you join the board. And so several very prominent dentists stood behind him and supported him, and he is now on the board unanimously elected. So you're going to hear more about that for sure. He's going to raise some, you know. So Jim also alluded to concentration versus dose. That's one that all of you should be aware of. And anybody that says, oh, yes, we're lowering the concentration here so only people are safe. Well, I don't know what these people learned in medical school or dental school, but there's very little, if no, relationship to concentration and dose. So you can remind them of that. The concentration and dose are very different. So you can lower the concentration all you want, but depending on your size and weight and how much you drink, it's the dose you're going to get every day. So that can vary from 1 to 20 in factor magnitude. So please remind people of that. Anybody that says the concentration is being lowered so you're safe, tell them they really don't know what they're talking about. And just the last thing that I think is quite powerful too to remind people is that when you cross the border into BC, or when you go visit Quebec, look at their teeth. They're no different than ours. Not even a bit, not an iota. BC is 95% not fluoridated. Quebec is 97% not fluoridated. And when you fly over to Europe, they're 98% not fluoridated. The teeth are the same as ours, folks. So right there. That point and that slide that Jen showed from the World Health Organization showing all countries, no matter if they're fluoridated or not, improving markedly over the last 5 decades, two very powerful things that you can throw out there to people that are uninformed. So anyway, I've taken up enough time here. Thanks for coming out, folks. It's wonderful to have you all out here. And hopefully you'll really grab this and work on it again. I know we lost 2 years ago by only 1 vote. So it's not going to take much on city council to sway them. And if we win by 1 vote, guess what? They'll go and turn off that tap. That's all it takes. This is one of the easiest ways you can make a difference in the world. Turn off that tap. The people in the waterworks department will go yippee and yahoo because they don't have to wear those double, triple suits and masks and gloves and everything anymore to deal with that toxic substance.
That's a good point you just made, I was going to just say on the economical end of it. Has anybody tried approaching that, what it costs us to monitor this and put this into our water?
The question is about the economical aspect of it, the dollars and cents. Calgary, we're quite fortunate actually, because Calgary was going to have to spend in the neighborhood of $6 or $7 million to upgrade their equipment and plants to administer fluoride. And so we just happened to throw that in as well into the mix along with the ethics. And so economics never hurts to throw that in as well. So the cost, as mentioned in some of the good brochures that folks have put out, is something like, say, $100,000 a year to Lethbridge to fluoridate. 99,000 of that goes down the drain onto your lawns, on the golf courses, into the river, yeah. So only 1% of that is actually drained and fluoridated water.
Can I just say that I've heard that Milk River have stopped fluoridating water because of the cost and also the manning levels required to do that. If anyone else has heard that.
So that is a good end. If the plants need upgraded, if the equipment needs upgraded, it can cost a huge amount of money. And so that's a good opportunity to say, hey, let's have a look at this. Do we really need this? Do we really have to spend all this money on equipment? Because the money spent on the actual fluoridation is not huge. But, yeah, it's the plants are good.
Let me mention that in Calgary, the motion to stop fluoridation was amended with instruction to the Calgary water employees to come up with a proposal of how to use the $750,000 a year that was spent on hydrofluorosilicic acid to assist those sectors of the population that wanted help with dental education or whatever else was necessary for them to improve their dental care.
Yeah, they actually have a program out through the Alexander Center for supporting low-income people through toothpaste and toothbrushes and education and dental work. So our money could be a lot better spent.
Doctor, how do you know if you had some health problems caused by drinking tap water? Because, I mean, I drank tap water, plenty of times for a few years or whatever. And how would you know if you're getting any problems?
Any adverse effects?
Immune system.
So the question is, if you've been drinking tap water for years, how do you know if you're getting any adverse effects? And Jim, you can possibly address that too. But it's very insidious, and that's one of the problems we have with proving this. If someone drank tap water for 2 weeks and had some skin symptom or some kidney problem, I mean, it would be pretty easy to prove. But fluoride is very insidious. About 50% is secreted by the kidneys and 50% accumulates in the body, mostly in bone, but also in neurological tissue and the muscle tissue like the heart and thyroid. So it is very hard to prove. Some people are thinking, and some of the research is going in the direction of a lot of the musculoskeletal problems that are out there, a lot of the arthritis, maybe some of the autoimmune diseases are at least indirectly linked to fluoridation. But again, can we prove that? If we could prove that, fluoride would be gone from the world tomorrow. But that is part of the problem. It's insidious, it's very slow, it progresses over years and decades. Jim?
Well, a lot of the adverse effects are things that occur slowly building up because we're slowly building up our sequestered fluoride in our bodies throughout our whole life. But there are a group of people, apparently, and this hasn't been addressed with a very large systematic study, but there have been hundreds of cases of people who complained of very acute problems with nausea, vomiting, headaches, sleeplessness, and so on, who happened to be fortunate enough to go to a physician who was aware of some of the problems that can be created by fluoride. So what they did in a number of these cases is take a history of what the people were eating and swallowing and eliminating as much fluoride as possible. And in hundreds of those cases, their symptoms went away within a week or two. And then this is not a very good controlled experiment, of course. The patient knew they were no longer drinking fluoride and so on, and the doctor didn't know who was fluoride-free and who wasn't more. But with prior consent from the patient, the old diet, which was high in fluoride, like a lot of tea drinking, for example, was reinstituted without the knowledge of the patient. Well, I mean, they would know if they were drinking more tea, but they would give them fluoride at the same estimated that they were getting before, and their systems came back. And they didn't know that their diet had been changed. Then when they stopped it, got rid of the fluoride, the symptoms went away. So that's what we would call anecdotal evidence, and people are often accusing others of using anecdotal evidence because they're not invented. Of course not. But anecdotal evidence is what leads us to do systematic studies that are more than anecdotal. And that's what we should do in cases like this. But almost no research occurs in North America on the adverse effects of fluoride. And this is why in many studies we find that the data was gathered in other countries by scientists working in other countries. And it's just, they just can't break through their assumption that there's no problem.
Any question?
I guess we're in question and answer mode here.
Is that okay?
Yes, we are, yeah.
And are you the moderator?
I am.
Yeah.
That's why I'm sitting down.
Yeah. I have the sense that many people in here, you all know each other and probably are very well informed on these issues. I'm kind of new to this issue and probably not as well informed as many in here, but associate of mine, Joshua Blakely, did a report for Press TV in Iran on fluoride, and he did it here in Lethbridge. Neil was one of the people we talked to. And, I was quite surprised, seeing this international report on fluoride coming out of Lethbridge, broadcast out of Tehran, which is a rather controversial place right now. And so the focus was on fluoride, and there was a clip of Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is very interesting to me. Edward Bernays is the person who invented the term public relations. He's a propaganda expert. Goebbels was very fascinated by him. And he's kind of invented the psychological warfare of the Cold War. He sold cigarettes to women. He was a very influential person in the 20th century, inventing how to affect public opinion and to take some issues off the agenda and put other issues on the agenda, and to do mind control, thought control. And so apparently Edward Bernays is the person, according to this report, who came up with this idea. And it seems to me fluoride had a problem. It was polluting. It was, it's an output in many industrial processes. And you can just picture him saying, well, if we can convince people fluoride is a medicine, good for fixing an ailment in little children, then we'll create an atmosphere where fluoride will be a positive, it'll have a positive. So this was quite, this rang very true to me, that fluoride from the beginning, it was a psyop. And of course I guess we're used to being called conspiracy theorists, people who talk about these issues. And so many things that are called conspiracy theories have in fact a lot of substance. It's a way to dismiss people. And I think, by saying, oh, the people who support fluoride prohibition are the same people who want to question 9/11, who have questions about chemtrails. Yeah, we do have a lot of questions about, how psychological warfare is done. And Edward Bernays is the kind of guru of it. He is kind of the leader of the professional movement, how to do this. So do people, I said it to Mark, like he's Edward Bernays, and everybody kind of shook their head as if it was sort of common knowledge that he was involved in the beginning. But what's the professional position?
Yeah, that's the front page of the pamphlet right there. Now, scientific evidence on effects of smoking is really good for you. That's Edward Bernays right there.
Well, in fact, Bernays came in rather late on this story. The effort to show the public that fluoride was not only harmless but it was beneficial to us started in the 30s. and involved. This story is told with meticulous documentation in Christopher Bryson's book called The Fluoride Deception. He also brings Bernays into the picture, but that happened later, after World War II. And he just professionalized the propaganda operation, but it had begun earlier as a way to protect companies that were causing harm to people and to livestock with their operations that produced the contamination of air and water with fluoride. And these companies wanted to protect themselves from lawsuits, so they hired a bunch of lawyers who became the Fluoride Lawyers Committee, which recruited scientists who were willing to be corrupted and who pretended to do research. And if they turned up showing harms that they couldn't deny, the papers weren't published. And that sort of thing went on. So these industries were involved, and that's where the money that supported this campaign to sanitize fluoridation, and the United States government, which was using huge amounts of fluoride for the enrichment of uranium. And so it was considered a life-saving, problem for them, because they hadn't had the atomic bomb before anybody else. And then that's the way it got started. And then Bernays came in as a professional propagandist.
He created a big push, though, you're right there. He took it over the top. He made people believe that fluoride was good for our kids, and doctors in particular. You get doctors on side that say that fluoride is good for kids, pretty easy selling. That was a big push in the 50s.
This kind of, I get the impression it's almost like ulterior motive, because quite honestly, any truthful, reasonable thinking person, regardless what side of the equation you're on fluoride, would agree that it does no earthly good, whether you're for it or against it. You're absolutely 100% completely honest, based upon all the facts out there, not opinion. So carrying on with that, the two main things that I took note of, from both you doctors, is number one is the words mass medication. That's pretty big, and the lowering of the IQ. I mean, that's based upon fact. 7 points. And just considering that, it just led me to the thought in question: is any remote consideration that this is done intentionally, promoting fluoride by the government to perhaps bring in policies that may be unsavory, because people are mass medicated, lower IQ, and for lack of a better term, dumbed down.
Well, only 40% of Canadians are dumbed down, so maybe that's the 40% that vote for the Conservatives.
I don't have any comment on what you say, except to say that some conspiracies are true. And we're confused being conspiracy theories. Well, some conspiracy, let me put it another way, some conspiracy theories are based on reality. Same thing with paranoia about it. Sometimes they're based on reality. But yes, I tried not to get into the discussions of how it started and why and all that, though obviously a lot of people are very curious about that. I don't mind talking about it, but I want to emphasize that the questions are: is it effective? Is it safe? Is it ethical? And no matter how it started, those are the questions that should determine whether we do it or not.
There's a lot of different ways you can get people interested in the topic too, but to bring it back to that same central point, no matter where they're coming from, bring it back to that point. Not safe.
Sort of along those lines, you alluded to the fact earlier that you were a proponent of fluoride earlier, just because of the fact you didn't have the time to research it yourself. But then once you did, you discovered it wasn't such a good idea.
tiles literature.
But you researched it, so what are, what is the one thing that sort of cemented in your mind that we can pass to the second level? Here is somebody who was like you before they thought it was good. This is the one thing, the big smoking gun that showed me.
So the question is, a smoking gun, what's the real big thing?
I don't know if there's a smoking, but there must have been something at one point for either of you that, said, let's look the other way.
As I mentioned, what triggered it for me was the ethics of mass medicating people, not doing any good, without informed consent, without control of dose or dosage, and with a substance that's one of the most toxic elements in the world, and doesn't do anything.
Dr. Dickson, if you look behind us, you can see a picture we took at the Lethbridge water treatment plant on a recent tour there, and this was the label that was affixed to the bulk fluoride tank in the Lethbridge water treatment facility. So if you look at where we conveniently underline, because it's kind of lost in the print, ingestion may cause severe injury or death. So what Dr. Dickson's saying about it being one of the most toxic substances known around is true. Further down on the warning label there, they actually warn that the empty container is considered hazardous even when empty. So that's the extent of its toxicity.
Can I take a picture of this?
Yeah, I can send you that one if you like to.
Oh,
That's even better.
Put it on your Facebook, let your friends know.
Who are the major merchants of fluoride?
Well, most of it's scrubbed out of the fertilizer stacks in the southern states of the fertilizer industry. So it's a highly toxic contaminant. It has to be scrubbed out of the stacks. It cannot be put by law, by very strict and stringent law, it cannot be put into the air, it cannot be put into streams, rivers, lakes, ocean, or ground, or earth. It can't be put anywhere except into a toxic dump like Swan Hills waste facility plant, or into this glass of water. It's the only place it can be disposed of, toxic disposal dump or in city water.
Actually, I'm sorry, just to add to that, I've been informed too from a source in the industry in the U.S. that I was talking to recently, and he said that there was a hurricane last year, the year before, that flooded some of the phosphate fertilizer plants in Florida, and so it shut down a lot of the plants that were supplying hydrofluorosilicic acid. So now they're sourcing a good portion of it, at least in the U.S., and it's unconfirmed. It looks like possibly in Canada from China. So it's not even good old American-made poison; it's Chinese-made poison.
Very different control in China.
You just mentioned that it can't go into land, streams, lakes, rivers, whatever. It's pretty much you've covered every category that that water is being put into.
Exactly.
Whether it's going down our drains, or we're feeding into the drain, or watering our lawns, it's going exactly. It's not even being treated, because it's going in Lethbridge, it's going directly either in the catch basins or into the storm sewers, which is going directly into the river.
So the point being made here is that it gets into all those sources that I just mentioned by law. It's strictly allowed not to go into by the fact that it's into our water and it gets into those sources.
So are we waiting to happen the same thing, just what the county here, on August and stuff like that?
Yeah.
We're going to start skipping to everywhere, then we're going
Yeah.
to start cutting back on the ordinance.
So basically, it's an end around the law, isn't it?
Except they get paid for it.
They do. They get paid a small amount, but they would have to pay a huge amount to dispose of it.
I actually called Swan Hills, and they wanted $1 per kilogram to dispose of the fluoride. And when they asked me where this fluoride was coming from, I said, well, we were just wondering in Lethbridge here what it would cost to dispose of our fluoride if we got rid of it. And he said, oh, it's for drinking water. I'd have to also test it to see what other heavy metal contaminants are in it, because it may cost more than $1 per kilogram. So that gives you an idea of what the environmental disposal agencies, how they feel about it.
Yeah, so depending on how much lead, arsenic, cadmium, other not very savory elements are in your drinking water is how much it would cost to dispose of it in Swan Hills toxic waste disposal plant.
So it costs more to dispose of it than it does for our city to pay for it.
Yeah, the the comment here is that you absorb it through the body too. So when you bath or shower, you certainly absorb fluoride, recourse as a gas, through your skin. So it's not just, so if you want to take it out of your home, that's the point we made about in poor societies, underdeveloped areas, is that they have a very difficult time. They might be able to afford some bottled water from Costco, but most of them can't afford $2,000 with a reverse osmosis system to take it out of their whole home. So even though they're not, you might not be drinking it in their bottled water, or they might be, depending on where it came from. They will certainly absorb it through their skin.
And that's also from steam from the shower, breathing it in as well, right?
Yes, any sort of water vapor and water contact to the skin will be absorbed. Yes.
Assuming that since humans absorb it through their skin, fruits and vegetables when washed in fluoridated water also absorb fluoride.
They can, yes, they can for sure. And a lot of fruits and vegetables that are picked green and shipped thousands of miles are sprayed with a fluoride compound as well to preserve them, to keep them from ripening too soon. And that's something that's being worked on by the Fluoride Action Network. Mark, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, that's another vote for buying organic, everybody, because
So, or that one, okay.
Small commercial endorsement.
just small.
Organic.
I just think that this is like, I'm sure everybody in this room agrees with me. I just have to say something because I have been thinking about this situation for a really long time now. But even if you, like, say Lethbridge doesn't approve removing fluoride from the water, say you buy a $2,000 filtration system for your home, say you have kids, and those kids go to school and they drink public water at school. You can't stop that. You know, you have to ensure that your entire community eliminates it. It can't just be one household.
Well, that's one of the problems, that we get it from so many different sources these days. We get it from the pots and juices that we drink, all the canned foods, processed foods. It's just a plethora of things, even some of the bottled water. So there's so many sources for fluoride, and that's one of the reasons for the increase